Good morning. Good morning to all of you for being here. It's early in the morning for our students, not so early for you. Thank you for coming out at this time. You know, it's a thrill for us to have so many parents here for this day and also to get some sense for our program. So I'm Rich Lyons. I'm the dean of the school. I have been on the faculty here since 1993. I finished my undergrad in 1982, and I've been dean. This is my 10th year as dean, and it has been, you can imagine what a thrill it has been to have been an undergrad in this program, in the business school, and then to be able to come back and serve on the faculty, and then to be able to serve as dean. It's been an absolute thrill. Let me start by saying how much I appreciate the outstanding young people that you have produced, right? I know you're proud. You've got to be proud. I would be proud. I've got a 16-year-old. I got a later start. If any of you have any advice for my 16-year-old on how to get into Berkeley, I would welcome it. No kidding, you know, sort of parental services for hire. You're winners already. You have a brand out there, right? So you can. It sounds like it's impossible, but how remarkable the students are is getting even more so. I'll go through a little bit of data. I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A, so you can ask me whatever you want to ask me about the program. But there's some things I wanted to talk about on the front end, and that starting point of just how outstanding these young people are is the most important message here today. So let me give you a little bit of background, just a touch on the school, and then talk a little bit of data, give you some sense of what I'm excited about, what's really going on. Some of you have heard about this new this dual degree program in engineering and a bunch of other things that are going on. It's really an exciting time. But let me take a step back. You may not know this. This is the second oldest business school in the U.S. The University of Pennsylvania has the oldest business school and wonderful university. And the University of Chicago and UC Berkeley opened their business schools in the same year. I don't know which week it was, so we'll call it tied for second. That was 1898. And Berkeley was not one of the first business schools in the MBA market. The MBA market really got started around 1910, 1915 in a number of East Coast schools, but 1898. So we've been an undergraduate business school from the beginning. In fact, we didn't get in the MBA market until around the 1940s or so. So we were not among the first in the MBA, but very, very first in a long tradition as a business school. It was called the College of Commerce from 1898. Not even sure exactly when it changed. Berkeley Business School for many, many years. It became the Haas School in the early 1990s. And it has been really moving forward ever since. If somebody said in the history of the school, what are the turning points? What are the real inflection points? You'd have to call 1995 an absolute inflection point. For those of you that know the Berkeley campus, there's a building called Barrows Hall, and the business school used to be in Barrows Hall. When I was an undergraduate, that's where we took all of our classes. Not to disparage Barrows Hall, but it isn't anything like these buildings, and we shared it with a number of other units, political science, sociology, and many of those units are still in Barrows. So in 1995, we moved into these three beautiful buildings. They're completely alumni and alumni family funded. Actually, the first alumni funded buildings on the campus, right, in 1995. So this was, you know, I often will say this, and it is absolutely true. The state created this business school. The alumni made it great. And so these buildings would not be here without all the support of literally generations of alumni. And we wouldn't have the faculty, the endowed chairs, the student aid. There's so many things that are part of what, you know, transform this from a school to an institution, to something with kind of real heft in society. And that's an important part of, you know, my role as dean is understanding that and making sure that that's strong. So let me say a few things about how competitive it is to get into the school. Now, our undergrad, how many degree program students do we have? We have about 2,100 roughly. If you know the numbers on the undergraduate program, we have around 700 of those, about 1/3 are undergraduate students. So most top business schools actually don't have undergraduate programs. You probably know this, right? Harvard and Stanford do not have undergraduate programs. And it's a huge pride point for us, right? As I told you, right? Our first almost 50 years, we're only undergraduate, right? And It's really also an anchor to our public mission. As most of you know, if you are a California resident and you come to Berkeley's business school, the amount of money you pay in tuition is exactly the same as if you were an English major at Merced or an English major at Berkeley. There's no differential tuition. If you go to most public universities, their business schools have differential tuition for their undergraduate programs, and pretty substantially so, right? It is also true that as part of the California Master Plan for Higher Education back in the 1960s, from that date to today, and there is no plan to change this, roughly 1/4 of the slots in Berkeley's undergraduate business school go to community college transfers. And that's part of the social mobility machine that Berkeley is, right? Now, if you look at the prices of our MBA programs, you'd say, I'm not seeing as much public anchor there, right? But if you look at our undergraduate program, right, with those the community colleges and the no pricing differentials, et cetera, that's an important part of the publicness, of the continuing publicness of Berkeley and Berkeley's business school. A couple of other quick stats. Here are two fractions, 1/3, 1/5. You might remember those, 1/3, 1/5. You might not remember what they were after the fact, but you'll say, what was that, 1/3, 1/5? Roughly 1/3, actually a little more than 1/3 of our students in the business school are Pell Grant eligible, which means they come from families with incomes of roughly $50,000 or less. As our provost recently said, Berkeley as a university has more Pell eligible students than Stanford has students. And it's not just a scale thing, although it's partly a scale thing, right? Berkeley's much larger than Stanford is. But it's also a ratio thing. So if you look, the last piece of data I had, and Stanford is competitive in terms of Pell-eligible students with the Ivy League, but it runs about 16% or 17% at Stanford, Pell-eligible. And at Berkeley, our Haas school, our number is 34%. I said 1/3, but it's right. So, that's part of what this remarkable public institution is about, right? What is the 1/5? About 1/5 of our students in the business school are the first in their family to go to college. That's a remarkable thing. Neither of my parents, I mentioned I came to Berkeley, neither of my parents had a 4-year degree. I came to Berkeley, and one of my teachers here at Berkeley, I studied economics in graduate school, but one of my teachers came up to me, and I was a sophomore, and I'd written a midterm exam in my macroeconomics class. Her name was Fran Van Loo. She has since retired. We remain friends, not surprisingly. But she came up to me in class, handed me my midterm. I'd done pretty well in the midterm. And she said, would you come see me in my office? I'd never talked to her one-on-one. I went to see her in her office, and she asked, have you ever thought about getting a PhD in economics, right? Well, I did not come from a family with tons of education in it. I went to the business school because I come from a business family. I wanted to go into business. I love business, still do. 4 years later, I'm in a PhD program in economics, and there's just, you've heard the phrase, you can't be what you can't see. I mean, that was, she not only had that conversation with me, she also said, you need to talk to some faculty members about what getting a PhD in economics actually looks like, right? So she mentored me in that way as well. In fact, one of the faculty members she connected me with, you all know who Janet Yellen is. Janet Yellen taught macro here for some 30 years. You may not know who Janet Yellen is married to, but Janet Yellen is married to a guy named George Akerlof. And George Akerlof has a Nobel Prize in economics, and he's in our econ department here at Berkeley. And this is well before, right? This is when I was an undergrad, well before George won his Nobel Prize. But it just so happens that the faculty member she connected me with, and I got to sit down with him one-on-one, was George Akerlof. And 20 years later, he's winning a Nobel Prize, but he's given it to me straight. He's basically saying, you need more math if you want to go to graduate school in economics. It's sort of, I thought I was doing well, and George dressed me down and said, if you want to do this, there's some stuff you need to do. And I went back to Foothill College, community college, after I graduated from Berkeley, and I took a bunch of linear algebra, a bunch of math classes that I needed for grad. Anyways, these are the sorts of things that all of us can imagine or think about somebody in our lives, especially our educational lives, that have had that kind of impact, right? And certainly this is the place that did that for me. How about a little bit more? When people say, What separates the school? I don't want to sound too competitive up here, but there are a bunch of educational institutions that are absolutely outstanding. We all know that, right? So at the end of the day, is the talent coming here or isn't it, right? When people ask me, what problem are you trying to solve as our dean, right? We've entrusted you with the controls here. And ultimately, this is one of society's most important assets. I mean, ultimately, it is how do we use this institution to create as much benefit for society, California and beyond, as we can. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. But if somebody says, okay, it's budget time and you have to invest in A or B, what are you going to choose? That's a hard criterion to make a choice about what you're going to invest in. So a little bit more operationalizable criterion, goal, is I, as your dean, our dean, I'm trying to maximize the long-term reputation of the school. I think if we do that well, we will attract the best students, faculty, and staff, and if we have the best people, we will be able to deliver into that, 10,000-foot criterion. How do we bring as much value to society as possible? So when students get into this school and 3 others, why do they choose us? And that's a pretty good old-fashioned competitive question, just like in a lot of the industries all of you are in, right? It's like, look, people have a lot of choices. Why should I come here? And you got to have a pretty quick answer to that. And so the things real quickly that we do talk about, I'm not going to be able to go through this in a lot of detail, but we talk about people, place, and culture. People, place, and culture, right? So the people starts with the students, but it's got the faculty and it's got lots of other things. I'm going to give you a few people facts, but I could never sort of encapsulate why the people around here are so extraordinary, but they really are on many fronts, right? And I want to talk a little bit about place. Place is partly Berkeley, right? This brand, go to Shanghai and say Berkeley and see how people react. Or Sao Paulo, or name it, right? It's just, the brand of Berkeley globally is just outstanding. And then culture. I mean, at the end of the day, what do we stand for? What are the values that we stand for? Are they different? Can we write down things? Have we written down things that not every school could write down? And are we living by them? Right? And that's part of what I'm sure you've heard from the students that you're so close to. So here's a little bit on some of the students' part. So people, place, and culture. So a little bit on the people. How many undergraduate students do we have? As you know, it's juniors and seniors, right? 2-year program, about 350 per year. So we have about 700 students. Average GPA of the sophomores from Berkeley. Again, 3/4 of the students in the business school are sophomores who got in from Berkeley. Roughly 1/4 are community college transfers. The average GPA of the continuing students, the Berkeley sophomores, 3.7. That's at Berkeley. Not as undergrads, right? That's their first 2 years at Berkeley. And 3.9 for the transfer students. The age range in the undergraduate program, 18, not surprising, to 51. Average age, 20. Average age of the continuing students, 20. Average age of the transfer students, 22. They're a little older, a little grittier, to be honest with you. Sort of been through a bit more, the ones through community college. Percentage women, 49%. Percentage minorities, 16%. Veterans in the class, 9. Student athletes, 27. Now I'm going to brag a little bit. But all of our students are great, and these athletes are quite remarkable. But the Haas School, I mean, I don't know if you follow Twitter, but I kind of shamelessly tweeted Rio medal count for the Haas School of Business. Gold, 3. Ryan Murphy is an undergraduate business student, and he won 3 gold medals. Undergraduate business students. He's also at Berkeley, but anyways. We take credit for Ryan right here. Anyways, he's an extraordinary young man, too. I mean, he's just an extraordinary person. We're very proud of him. We have 6 student athletes that play on the Cal football team. Pursuing simultaneous degrees, dual degrees, right? You might think, dual degrees, what? I mean, when I was around here, dual degree, I had my hands full with 1 degree. So what's going on here? You know, so many students are coming in with AP units, advanced placement units, right? Many of them aren't taking physics and chemistry and math and stuff, right? So 21% of our students are, and this number is still growing, are getting dual degrees. Number of students, Haas students, who graduate in 2 years from getting into the Haas School as juniors, 99%. That's a really it is, of course, a credit to them. We do everything we can to keep them on track. And part of what we're looking for is people that are kind of getting it done, right? That's part of what we look for when we let them in. You know, real quickly, what percentage actually get in? I know this at some level, this is a sore spot, right? Because you know, just getting into Berkeley is hard enough. So about 38% last year of the Berkeley sophomores who applied to get in got in to the Haas School. And roughly 10% of the transfer student population got in. It's tough to get in as a transfer student. So if you look at the average, it's obviously two very different, you know, sized pools, but about 14.5%, 15% of the students who applied got in. Faculty, look, the faculty, I could go on and on and on. You know, many of them are names that your sons, daughters, family members. When we think about Holly Schroth, we think about Steve Etter in finance. Alan Ross teaches our social and political environment of business, our business ethics class that's required of everybody. Frank Schultz in strategy, accounting, leadership. Is just a remarkable group of people that your students are seeing. San Francisco Bay Area, let me say just a few things about place, right? So I mentioned Berkeley. And how are we connecting to Berkeley? So one of the things some of you may have seen, this is our alumni magazine. It's called Berkeley-Haas. And on the cover, it says closer than ever. And what's getting described here is this new dual degree with engineering. So we just launched this. The UC application that just went live on August 1 for the next round of applications has a checkbox on it. And if you say, I want to apply to Berkeley, and then you say, I'm interested in engineering or I'm interested in business, you can also check a box that says, I'm interested in this dual degree program. It's brand new. If you think changing the UC application is easy, that was the biggest triumph of the whole program, right? It's like a 10-campus application. In any event, that launched, and it's going to be a super exciting program. Do you remember what I just said? You know, most top business schools do not have an undergraduate business school. They don't have an undergraduate business degree. So Harvard and Stanford, for example, can't offer this. They do not have an undergraduate business school. There's no undergraduate business degree at those universities. So part of what's going to happen, I think this is the right thing to do in its own right, but part of this is imagine students who could go to literally any university, right? These 5 standard deviation human beings, where it's like, oh my gosh, what planet did you come from? And they're getting, and many of your sons, daughters, kids, our students are like that. It's, you know, where will they choose to go? This is the kind of program where people will say, this program at this university in this geography, yes, I'm in, right? So that's one of the things when we talk about place and we talk about getting even more out of these links with Berkeley. Literally yesterday, and it was yesterday, I was in a meeting at the faculty club with the dean of the life sciences, me, one of the faculty in chemistry and life sciences, and a donor. And this donor is a venture capitalist, and this donor is saying, I would like to help you start the same dual degree program, life sciences plus business, right? MCB, molecular cell biology, pre-med, all of these kinds of majors, right? It's like, yes, let's do it. I mean, imagine, anyways, you can imagine where this is going. If we had a narrative, a vision, this future state where maybe as many as a third of our undergraduate business students are getting a dual degree in chemistry, life science, or engineering. So, you know, a science in business vision that is getting stronger and stronger. So, I mean, it'll take a little while to get there, but that's there. You know, Berkeley's so strong. Berkeley's strong in field after field. The STEM fields, the science, engineering fields are just so strong. So anyways, that's described here. That's part of place. Another part of place is that building. You couldn't help, I hope you couldn't help but, you know, see it out there. There's a building that's almost complete out there. It's about 80,000 gross square feet. So when these buildings opened in 1995, we had 1,300 students. We currently have 2,100, close to 2,200 students. So we're bursting at the seams. When somebody says, why didn't you launch something like that a while ago? Well, in fact, we didn't have room to grow. We literally were space constrained. And this new building, which is completely dedicated to the students, it is totally student-facing. There isn't a faculty office in the new building. There isn't a staff office in the new building. It's flat, flexible use classrooms, kind of learning by doing classrooms where you can reconfigure them quickly. It's group study space, because so much more work goes on in business schools in groups. So much more work goes on in the world in groups and teams. So it's not, you can't have quiet libraries and classrooms. If that's all you have, there's a missing middle, right? This building, among other things, fills in that missing middle. The building is also, this building, like the existing ones, is 100% alumni and alumni family funded. And that's an important part of it. In fact, I didn't mention it, but the engineering program. One of the neat things about the engineering program is I was able, when we were helping to get it funded, the dean of the College of Engineering and I were standing and meeting with donors, and both of us are in the room at the same time, right? And donors are looking at us both right between the eyes and realizing how excited we were. And $15 million came in to support an endowment for that wonderful dual degree program. So I think part of what society is telling us is you need to start spanning boundaries, right? They're telling us. It's like you need to integrate. When we pitched that program to the Haas School board, Shankar Sastry, the dean at engineering, was seated right next to me. It's the first time he's ever attended a Haas board meeting. And when we pitched to his board, I was seated next to him. First time I've ever been to his board. It's kind of like, why don't we start inviting other deans to our board meetings and see what happens? I mean, it is really exciting to see Berkeley sort of in this, it's a different mindset for us. All right, the last piece that I want to touch on, and then I'm going to open it up for some Q&A here. Culture, right? I talked about the people, and there are so many dimensions of that, but the quality of the students is a huge part of that. I talked about place very briefly, right? How do you connect to Berkeley? How do you connect to entrepreneurship in the Silicon Valley and so forth? And then the third piece is the culture. Now, most of you have been part of civic or private sector organizations, right? That some get this more right than others. Is there a set of values that you can stand for that people say, hey, that matters to me? I think we're doing it. It's true. I think it's valuable. The world needs more of it. And I think it's different. I think other people aren't saying this, or they're not saying it this way, right? And so about 6 years ago, so Berkeley has always had a strong, by culture, I mean, what are the norms, the behavioral norms and values and attitudes that kind of sum a place up? I mean, we've all been around long enough to know that you get a sense pretty quickly when you're in a company, in a civic organization, what have you. It's sort of like, well, they kind of do it this way. They think about the world this way, right? We know what culture and chemistry feel like. So about 6 years ago, we said, look, could we double down on values? Could we write down a set of values and actually use them in admissions and just walk the walk as much as we possibly can? And what would we write down? So Berkeley has long had a definable culture. I mean, you could, again, going back to my example, ask somebody in Sao Paulo, ask somebody in Shanghai, what's Berkeley about? I mean, they will have associations with Berkeley, right? In 2008, when I started, I had been acting dean for 1 year, but in 2008, I became dean. And you go on the Berkeley-Haas website in 2008, I actually did this, and you search on the Berkeley-Haas website for core values, culture, principles. What do you find? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So there was a latent culture, a pretty strong latent implicit culture, but there was no explicit culture. And when there's no sort of explicit culture, you're not being very intentional in your admissions. You're not able to say to somebody, for example, at the MBA level, who has a GMAT score of 800, perfect score, and say no, because you don't fit. Now, most companies that are intentional about their culture, and I think most great companies are, they say no to great people all the time because of fit. That's how they define who they are. So we set out to try and write, we spent a couple of years doing this, right, to write down some things that we felt were true, were valuable, and were different. So we used the phrase defining principles rather than core values for a reason. We wanted them to separate us. We wanted students to say, that's the type of leader I want to be. So you could think of these as just core values. You could also think about, that's the brand of leadership that we are invested in around here. So what did we write down? We wrote down 4 things. we wrote down one thing that is just as Berkeley as anything imaginable. You've probably seen this. Question the status quo. This habit of mind, there's got to be a better way to do this. Isn't there a better way to do this? That is as deep in Berkeley's history. Now, we couldn't write down as the business school, challenge authority, okay? That wasn't going to work, all right? So as somebody put it to me years ago, you take something that's out there that's big and everybody gets it, and you do a judo move on it, and you redirect its polarity. And when I tell people, question the status quo around here is that habit of mind that we're looking for, isn't there a better way to do this? Every company I talk to says, I want to hire that. And no company I talk to says, I want to hire challenge authority for its own sake, right? But Berkeley has changed, and so have we. But that's a great habit of mind. And by the way, that is not perfectly correlated with intelligence. There are a lot of intelligent people that we've all worked with. And their first thought is not, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? They're on a track, and they like the track, and that's what they do. That's fine too. But Berkeley's not that kind of place. Question the status quo. I won't go through all of them in detail, but let me do it. One other. Confidence without attitude. You saw it on the board out there. Confidence without attitude. True confidence comes without arrogance. We do everything. We don't get this exactly right, but we do everything we can to live by this. Now, every single MBA who gets into this school is interviewed. And you probably know this, but we are interviewing more and more undergraduates now as well before they get in. It's not just a by-the-numbers thing. If you're going to take culture seriously, you're going to want to talk to somebody before they get in. Every MBA is interviewed. Imagine our full-time MBA is about 250 in a class. Imagine if I were up here saying confidence without the arrogance, confidence without attitude. And then here comes somebody from just the right family or just the right, it's sort of like, we got to let her in or we got to let him in, right? And this is somebody that anybody on the planet would call arrogant, and you let 2, 3, 4, 5 these people in, 1%, 2%. Every student will know you made that call. Every student. So do we play this clean? We play this clean. We have to. Otherwise, it's like, will you stop talking about this stuff? Really, I've had it, right? You write it down, you prance around, and then you let these people in? That's a problem. How do I remember the defining principles? I wear them around my shirt, just as an example. Okay, one of the defining principles, students always is another one we wrote down. I mean, at the end of your career, will you really get that you're not fully baked yet? Can I still hear feedback from the students and know that feedback is a reward, that I should be saying thank you? Can I take that? I mean, people forget at the end of their careers that they're not all the way there yet. And then beyond yourself, a sense of stewardship for something beyond just you and your career. And I say to the students, undergrad and grad, look, have you ever worked with somebody that you just know, 1 or 2 levels above you just know that she or he is just playing their own game? They're just totally out for themselves? Did you notice? Did anybody not notice? Are these the kind of people that are engendering the kind of trust and followership that leadership is made of? Look, people can tell. When people say officers eat last, we all know what that means. We all know whether this is a person that plays their life that way. And this is something that's more and more demanded of leaders. Do leaders always get this right? Of course they don't. Do we always get this right? We don't. But we are a business school that comes from a public university. And virtually all of the top business schools we compete with are private universities. Is service to society in the DNA of this place? It is. Beyond yourself is something we take super seriously. So I better stop there. There's just an awful lot going on here, and I'm sure you have questions. I'd love to take them. So do we have another 20 minutes, I think, or something like that? Great. So we have some time for Q&A, and really anything you'd like to talk about is fine. Was that not a question? It looked like a question. I'm going to cold call the next person that moves their arm, please. Yeah, go for it. Oh, yeah, this is better. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so our daughter is first-year undergraduate.
Great.
And I'm an MBA. Mm-hmm. My question is there any marginal value that you could see, likely value, for Suzanne to get an MBA after this rigorous program?
Yeah. Really important question. So I think the quick answer is to get an MBA immediately after finishing the program, not enough to do it. But there are a lot of people in our, we have an executive MBA program. These people are in their late 30s. They've been super successful. A lot has changed since they were undergrads, right? So when you start looking, an MBA isn't just right out of undergrad anymore. I know you know this. But the median age of our full-time MBAs is 27. So they have on sort of median, work experience is about 5 years. We don't let anybody into our full-time MBA. I think this is still true that the number is 0. The people that are in our full-time MBA with less than 3 years of experience. So part of this is, if you haven't had a direct report, some of these classes aren't going to make a lot of sense to you, right? You're talking about change management or something like that. It's like, what does that mean? Another thing that we talk about in school is, I just gave a talk at a conference of deans. It was at Rutgers. It was last week. And you know what? The talk was about the transformations that our programs, our business schools, they gotta learn the finance, the accounting, and the strat, right? But that's like table stakes. How do we transform people? And if you asked a dean, all right, name 5 transformations you're proud of from your program. Like state A, they come in state A, arrow, state B. Give me 5 of them. What's your program about? And the one that I talked about in this talk was from purpose consumers to purpose creators. Great leaders often instill a larger sense of purpose in the people around them. When I first became dean, one of the advisory board members at the Haas School, Margot Alexander, gave me some of the best advice of my life. Now, I was already dean at that point, but she said to me, don't forget, part of your job, you are the chief purpose officer. This institution matters, but not everybody gets to see the magic in the institution, the students, the classrooms, the research. You need to connect them to that. I was in this job before somebody told me that instilling purpose in the people around us was part of my job. And what if we can start getting people thinking about their responsibility as instilling purpose, making meaning when they're undergrads and MBAs? So I was too long an answer to your question, but when you start going from an undergrad program, and now you're in your later 20s or early 30s, and you got a pretty good sense for kind of something else you need to enable, but I think that's really it. Just getting the degree and saying, now I need to get the MBA, and I've been out for 2 years, I myself am skeptical. There needs to be a kind of destination. Yes, please.
You were talking about...
Oh, I'm sorry. There's a microphone up here. I'll take you next, and we'll get you the microphone. Please, sir.
Hi. I was an undergrad with you in underground in Barrows Hall.
Oh, I love it.
Mitch.
Love it.
And the thing that we wanted most was windows.
Yes.
What a great opportunity our kids have here.
Thanks for that.
What I want to ask about, my son's been talking a lot about internships.
Yeah.
He's a first year. It seems pretty daunting and competitive and confusing. If you could kind of tell us what that process is, because just starting here, he doesn't really know where he wants to be, and there seems like a lot of difficulty in finding that.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so I didn't read these stats, but if you look sort of 3 months after graduation, what percentage of our students, our undergrads, have jobs? And the number, 91%, I think was the number. It's way up there. We also have a program, I'm going to boast a little bit here, but our program, as you may have seen on the website and elsewhere, the #1 return on investment business school in the country. And it's the returns on, I know we don't just do it for returns, but I'm a parent too, and when somebody tells me that we do all the right stuff and the ROI is very high, that's not a bad statistic to hear. But going back to your point, more specifically, the internships, where are our undergrads going? There are 4 industries that they not all of them go to, but a lot of them go to, right? Tech is a natural one, banking and finance, consulting, and accounting, sort of audit related. The big 4 are still hiring very heavily here. So those, obviously, there are lots of different kind of future career options that open up out of any one of those 4 areas. And so the campus has a career services operation. And one of the things that we've done with our annual fund monies, the discretionary money that I have, is we've hired a person who's just, I think it's a career advisor / concierge, just for the Haas students. His name is David Woodward. So David Woodward is there to serve your students, okay? And then the last thing is, one of the sources of value for this remarkable institution is the alumni network. Our alums will take the call. They really will take the call. So it's sort of like, how do I use the alumni network? I mean, if somebody who got into the school as a junior sort of went to go see our alumni relations team, many of them are and sort of said, you know, what do I need to know to get more value, to make it easier to navigate this alumni network? They could coach you and you could figure out, all right, here's some of the calls that I would make. Other thoughts? Oh, I'm sorry, you had a question here. Thank you.
I am Eamon Kaval's mom.
Thank you.
My question was about the dual degrees.
Yes.
How much more work is it for, my son is a transfer student.
Yes.
How much more work would that add to his workload?
Oh, how much work? Look, the dual degrees one degree is hard. I mean, we know that. Dual degrees add. Now, part of what we've done with engineering, some people have said, but you're putting these two things together and you watered them down and they're not going to be what the other thing was. It's sort of like, our faculty would not let us do that. We launched the engineering business dual degree with electrical engineering and computer science, and not ME, mechanical engineering, because ME had so many upper division requirements, we couldn't get the math to work out. And now the ME faculty are basically saying, how do we get into this program? So when it comes to sort of the hardcore requirements, now the breadth requirements, engineering had some breadth requirements, Haas had some breadth requirements, they weren't well aligned. Now they're much better aligned. I don't call that a dumbing down, I call that just to kind of align it in a more sensible way. So it really depends, but we've tried to make it as, I mean, I can show you, if anybody's interested, what the curricula look like for people who are coming in with a lot of AP units, and even people who aren't coming in with a lot of AP units, how they could get out in 4 years. I obviously don't know your child's circumstances, but somebody coming in as a junior, right, it probably will get quite tough at that point, right? This is, you know, we've basically thought about the curriculum program for these dual degrees from freshman to senior. Coming in as a junior is almost surely going to be tougher. But it's not as tough for a number of these kids with the AP and other things as it might seem. It's still tough. It's still going to be a tough program. Yeah. Other thoughts and questions? Please, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Marcus Golter.
Thanks, Marcus.
And I'm a proud Berkeley dad. I would have just dreamed to even come to the school. So it's great to be here this morning. Question I have, with all your background and the feedback you're getting from all these great students and alumni, and as the dean of the school, where do you see the future opportunities for the students that are graduating, and what industries, and you know, where should they be thinking to put their efforts for all those 4 good reasons in the next decade?
Yeah. Well, look, it's an exciting time, right? There's a lot, people talk about disruption, that's one of the buzzwords that you hear a lot about, but industries are just getting profoundly redefined. We all know that, right? These so-called marketplace companies or platform companies, and thinking about Uber, and I mean, think about my industry, right? It's sort of like, I've been in the most stable industry, if I can call it an industry, for a long time. And now all of a sudden there's a lot of digital stuff going on, right? It's like, huh. You know, one of our alums asked me the other day, what is our school's content strategy? In a world where what you're producing is an information good, but it's a non-durable, to use the jargon, it's like Janet Yellen gives the lecture and it's over. But in a world where lectures get captured, where classrooms get flipped, where people watch the lecture at home and come in to discuss the policy nuances with Janet Yellen, rather than have her give the same lecture 4 times in the same week. All of a sudden now the notion of what is your content strategy makes a lot of sense. And part of why that question hit me like a ton of bricks, it's like not the way we think about what we do, but increasingly the way we need to think. We are content providers. at some level, both in terms of new ideas and research and in terms of the classroom. That's a different lens. Anyways, I haven't answered your question, so let me try and answer your question. This may be a little bit my own bias, but you know, the whole business analytics area, if you have some facility with data and you know how to get more insights out of large data sets, right? Data science, analytics. That is a really, really strong area. Most of your students wouldn't be in the program if they weren't pretty numerate already. But I think investing in that, in industry after industry. I mean, are we using analytics more here to run our business? You better believe it. Like admissions. How many people clicked on this icon? How do we follow up with those people? What was the result when we followed up with this, A/B testing, with this rather than this? How do we get better at that follow-up and so forth? A student came up to me. This was just one of those wonderful experiences. I think it was a year ago graduation, and he came up to me at the graduation and he said, you know, I got really interested in analytics, and I started doing a bunch of analytics for the Cal basketball team. And now he just got a job in the NBA doing analytics for a sports team. And so anyways, that's an area that I think is absolutely outstanding. The technology obviously is interesting, and I think we have more room for undergraduates to actually meld technology and business. That's super, super exciting. My field is finance, and there's still a lot of innovation out there going on, right? The game is getting, the crowdfunding, fintech, financial technology, crowdfunding, those are areas that seem super, but if you had to pick one, I'd say sort of analytics and business analytics, because that can open you up in a lot of industries, and a lot of people don't have it takes some firepower intellectually to be good at that. So that's one that I'm seeing that's super exciting. Do we have one here? Please. Thanks.
My name is Jonathan Bogner. My son is Gabriel Bogner. And first of all, you are fantastic.
Thank you.
I mean,
thank you.
Everyone should acknowledge that. You're great.
Thank you.
So I'd like to go back to school having you as my professor. So this is kind of a little mundane. My son is going to take a semester abroad.
Yeah.
And he's only got 2 years at Haas. What is your view if they're insisting on going to abroad for that one period of that he's four terms in Haas, and he's taking one term abroad? Yeah, on this, my view is clear. People need not agree with me, but go for it is the answer. Go for it. Look, we obviously, you know, it's 1/4 of the time here, but they're going to be as connected to their classmates, right? You know, you'd say, will he or she have the same, depending upon your own kids, the same kind of relationship, capital, and connectivity. So my field, when I was an undergrad at Berkeley, a good friend of mine, this really came from his family. He said, let's go to Europe for the summer. And it was our sophomore summer. And we got a Eurail pass, you remember, and we went to Europe for the summer. We traveled around Europe. I had not done much international, hadn't really done much travel. I talked a little bit about my family. And that so opened me up. So I told you the story of this faculty member who said, you should think about getting a PhD in economics. I did get that PhD in economics. And you know what my field was? International economics. And I teach international business and international finance. And when I was at Berkeley, I got a passion for the French language. I took a bunch of French classes, right? If you said, outside of business, what did you study? I loved physics. I took a bunch of physics classes. I took a bunch of French classes. And so international, it's like, people are saying rightfully, it's like, if you're aspiring to one of those jobs up there, and you don't have experience in multiple geographies, you know, people just aren't going to feel comfortable making the call. So, you know, it's just so eye-opening. I mean, I'm one of those people who says, go for it. You're right? If you have a child that does that, then they might have to do a couple of extra things in the 3 terms that they're here to make sure they're plugging into the alumni network or doing some of the other things. But definitely, and we have a lot more opportunities than we used to for that kind of exchange. Yeah, thanks for that question. Please, here.
What is Haas doing with the global campus?
Yeah.
That I've heard about. That's
Yeah.
somewhere down in Richmond? I
Yeah,
think?
it's right down here in Richmond, pretty close to Costco, if you know where that is down there. So just a little bit of background, the so-called Berkeley Global Campus. This is it used to be called the Richmond Field Station. It's quite large. I don't remember exactly how many acres, but it's really quite large, right? And so if somebody said, will there be a kind of Berkeley Global Campus on that site in 20 years, I think the answer is definitely yes. It looks like the Berkeley Global Campus vision has been slowed down a bit. Part of it is sort of how do you fund that at a time when things are tight, right? And so I know you've heard these data before, but when I was here in the 1980s as an undergrad, roughly 50% of Berkeley's budget was covered by the state of California. And 10 years ago, even 10 years ago, that number was around 30%. It had fallen. And here we are now, and we all know we've gone through difficult financial circumstances as a state and beyond. But now it's 12%. And so the only way that Berkeley can do the Berkeley Global Campus is to get sort of corporate and private philanthropic capital, and a lot of it, right? So it's sort of like you're building buildings. This is a capital investment. It's not just your buildings are sitting there and you go. So I think the quick answer is you really have to look out, in my view, 15 or 20 years before it. Now, could Berkeley really use that? And could you imagine that if we partnered with National University of Singapore and Cambridge University, you could just have this remarkable kind of global hotspot? That's the vision, and I think that will happen. But for now, we're obviously in discussions because the kind of business interface, the industry interface of what that is, especially if there are big companies involved. You could imagine, a Google or any company wanting to be involved. So the quick answer is nothing in the near term, but a big vision at the sort of 15-year horizon, and the business school will need to be involved. Yeah, thanks for that. Maybe a couple more questions. I think we have to leave very soon. Please.
Thank you, Dean, for a wonderful lecture and wonderful statistics about the school. What are some of the ways you think the parents can be a resource to the Haas Business School?
Why, thank you for that question. Thank you for that question. It is a setup. The question, even larger, right? There is a community of people who care about this place, who are invested in this place, right? And part of it is, do we feel like we're on I hope you don't mind the phrase, do we feel like we're on a championship team together? I mean, do we kind of feel like we're in this together? And I feel that way. I have to feel that way, or I wouldn't be in this job. But I guess that's part of it. It's sort of like, do I think this institution's playing a really important role? Do I think it warrants support in whatever kind, right? And then I think one of the things we have noticed is, people need to get involved in a way that works for them, right? And that there's so many different answers to that. For a lot of alums, it's like, well, look, one of the most valuable things alums can do is send us an application that wouldn't have come to Berkeley, right? If a student comes to Berkeley because of something you said, you vouched, you said, this place is amazing, you got to think about it, and then we end up getting that's really valuable, right? So that might be it, right? If you're talking up the engineering plus business program, right? That's a value to me. Let me give you one other quick example. So Barbara DeSore, the CEO of Citibank, not Citigroup, but Citibank, still big job. She's an alum of ours. And she's busy. I can't ask Barbara to do very many things. But one of the things we want, she lives in New York now. One of the things we wanted to do was increase the number of women in our full-time MBA program. And we got up over 40%. We had been running in the low 30s. We wanted to do better. So I said, Barbara, here are a couple of women we've admitted them. They got into these 3 other great business schools. We want them to come. They live in New York. They're interested in finance. Would you call them? She said, I'd be happy to. So she made 3 calls. Sabrina Simmons, the CFO of The Gap, made 3 calls. And the number of women, and I'm not saying that's the only reason it moved, but the percentage of women in our full-time MBA class went up about 7% that year. The first year we started doing this. So that was just one of those really spiky ways that she said, absolutely, that's perfect for me, because I don't have a bunch of time, but talking to a few remarkable young people is exactly what I want to do. So I realize I haven't answered your question specifically, but if you sort of said, I want to help connect students to internships, I want to sort of help drive students into the school, I want to get involved in this or that club activity, there's obviously financial help, right? We've got an annual fund that is absolutely essential. So when we think about what percentage, I mean, tuition has gone way up relative to where it was when I was here, when most of you remember this place, way up. Tuition covers about half of the cost of our operating budget. Our operating budget is about $150 million a year, and tuition's about half of that. So, you know, and for some people, it's like I'm less comfortable putting something in an annual fund bucket than I am in funding sort of a career services activity of some kind, right? Other people are different. It's sort of like, I think you're in the seat, you have a sense for what the next dollar should be spent on, and I want to support that. So I guess part of what I'm saying is look around at the institution, find out what we're doing, look at the stuff that kind of speaks to you right here, and get connected to that. Because I think we can have some fun. Some of you should be teaching here, for crying out loud. That's valuable. Go ahead, teach for us. Hey, go Bears. Thanks for coming today, okay? Thank you. Thanks.